A bat jumped out of the radiator and attacked and scratched her face. I'm Emily Gould. I am a writer and also I run an ebook store called Emily Books with my best friend Ruth Curry. This is a writing class. The assignment for this class is to write a personal essay about a tiny mistake that still haunts you. I've had a bunch of different jobs. I started out working in book publishing, and then I went and worked for a year at Gawker and learned how to be a blogger. And then I wrote a book of personal essays called And the Heart Says Whatever. Then I started working on my novel, Friendship. Today we are going to look at 3 of my favorite essays and analyze what makes them tick, steal what is best about them so that you can do it too. I mean, I think a lot of times when we read something and enjoy it, that sort of shuts down a kind of analysis because we're like, I love this, it's great, and we don't go further than that. But it can be really interesting to go a little bit deeper beneath the surface of a piece of writing. So this is a way for all of us, I think, to stay engaged with like what drew us to this kind of writing in the first place without totally just going on autopilot. So I picked 3 essays. It seems weird to say that they're my favorites because one of them is by me. Personal writing is something that increasingly we all do. It's really helpful in terms of just making sense of your lived experience sometimes to set it down in writing and make it into a story and see what happens. Sometimes things happen when during that process that surprise you. You might not turn out to be the hero of your story is one of the things that continually surprises me. Let's get to it. Let's start talking about some essays that I love. Has a hamster? I mean, come on. Okay, but I'm getting distracted from the main point. The assignment for this class is to write a personal essay about a tiny mistake that still haunts you. Tiny moments that define your life and make you who you are. They don't usually take place in situations that Hallmark makes cards for. Like, obviously, big life transitions that you put on your Facebook wall are really important and consequential, but a lot of what makes us the people we are takes place on an ordinary Tuesday. And you have to slow down and notice it, and writing can be one of the ways that we slow down and notice. Writing an essay like this could potentially take you an afternoon or like 6 months. Sorry, I don't want to scare you, but I've had things that I have had actually the great good fortune to write a draft of really quickly and then come back to and then revise over a period of like a long time, and it's always made stuff better. That being said, I think 1,000 words is something that you can write in a day. It would be good to take as much time as you can, even if that's just, overnight or a week. Get to the place where the writing is a little alien to you. It's like someone else has written it, and then come back to it and take that critical perspective as though someone else has written it, and then revise it from that standpoint, and then it will be 10 times better. I absolutely promise. So this is a writing class, which means that you have to write something. I hope that isn't shocking or problematic for anyone, but I'm really excited to see the writing that comes from this class, and also for everyone who takes this class to see each other's work, cross-pollinate, and hopefully come up with some amazing stuff, the likes of which the internet has never seen before. No, seriously, I'm excited. So let's get to it. Let's start talking about some essays that I love. So the first essay we're going to talk about is The Best Time I Maybe Got Rabies by Lola Pellegrino. And if you haven't read this essay yet, I really encourage you to do so, not just because it'll make the entire rest of this lesson make sense, but because it's awesome, and then come back and we'll do the rest of this. You could almost make a case that this essay fits the prompt of this class because it's definitely about a mistake. This story details the time when Lola, who was a freshman in college, snuck out of her dorm room window in order to have sex with the boy who had just broken up like an hour previous with her roommate. Then somewhat later in the semester heard a rustling sound and was surprised when a bat jumped out of the radiator and attacked and scratched her face. And the genius is how the rabies part is kind of not even the point. The rabies part is like a paragraph. So we're going to look at how she managed to pull that off and what makes it so perfect. One of the reasons I picked this essay is because it really invites you in. It almost makes itself irresistible. You just have to keep reading it once you've started. There's no other possible course of action. You're never going to read the headline, "The best time I maybe got rabies," and get to the end of the first paragraph of the story and not keep reading it. And the reason is because the first paragraph ends with Lola, who is from New York City, and finding out that she is going to be sharing a 2-bedroom double with a girl from Lawrence, Kansas, preemptively deciding that she's much cooler than this person. And she says, I was like, I'm going to blow this girl's mind. I sure am. I hang out with people who do heroin. Better go pack my realness bomb for tomorrow. So we're already two things. Okay. We're set up for what's going to happen when Lola's realness bomb goes off. Maybe not exactly what she expects. And the other thing is, wait, I thought this was a story about rabies. Where's the rabies? And that's actually going to keep you reading for the vast majority of the essay. The rabies actually doesn't come in until the last page. So that is what is called a hook, man. Make your first sentence really riveting. Like, put what your story is really about up front. I know it seems like Lola hasn't done that because she didn't start this essay by saying, there was a time when I pretty much thought I had rabies and I had to get a bunch of shots in my butt. But what she does say that the story is about is her realness bomb and what happens when it goes off. And that's actually the true thing that the story is about. Lola's perception of herself as like this cool badass and the sort of direct consequences of her cool badass behavior. The best thing and my favorite thing that Lola does, because she's an awesome writer, is she will pile up a bunch of details in a way that creates a really effective portrait of a person or a thing or a situation without having to say, that's what this person was like, that's what this situation was like. The best example of it in this essay is so good that I'm just going to read it to you. Also, it will be fun to read out loud. Standing before me is a man who safely secures his wallet to his wide-leg Junkos with a chain. He loves weed, his goatee, and ultimate frisbee, has a hamster, wears fingerless gloves, PlayStation. His name is Jake. He is the only white guy living in the African Diaspora Program House, and I'm going to have to fuck him. I'm speechless. It's just perfect. I think my favorite sentence is the one word, PlayStation. It can be really great to read stuff out loud to see how it sounds. I mean, that paragraph sounded amazing out loud because it had some really short sentences interspersed with slightly longer sentences, and it created a great rhythm, besides which all of the sentences were hilarious. And Junko jeans and wallet chains were mentioned. Has a hamster? I mean, come on. Okay, but I'm getting distracted from the main point, which is read stuff out loud. He will feel really goofy the first couple of times that you do it, but it's kind of fun if you get into it. If you need to like loosen it up for yourself, like do a funny accent or something. And you'll learn really quickly what stuff can go. If you're glazing over and you're skipping stuff while you're reading something out loud, guess what? You definitely didn't need that sentence. In terms of translating what Lola has done here into what you're going to do when you're writing your own essay, I'm imagining myself as Lola thinking about how to tell this story. And one of the things to potentially steal if this works for your story is, okay, I'm making this up, but if I'm Lola and I want to write about the best time I maybe got rabies, first I'm going to do a pass at this that is basically chronological. You know, this happened, this happened, this happened, rabies. And then I'm going to go back and see what details I can rearrange in order to create more narrative tension. If you do a first draft that just lays out everything that you have to work with, like everything that happened, it'll be really easy to see what can leave, what needs to stay, what you can rearrange, like what's more compelling if you like leave that detail in first. And honestly, I mean, for me, sometimes that this step of the process is as easy as cut the first paragraph, like the part that you thought that you had to say up front. Once you get it all written out, you'll realize, oh, like I can either cut that completely or I can move it to somewhere else in the story. I can move it towards the end. And that way the story begins like in the middle of the action, which is a much more compelling place to start. So just to recap, the things that I love about this essay and that I think make it a good kind of role model essay are the structure, the way that the author consciously plays with the chronology in order to create some narrative tension. I don't think I said this, but the jokes are really expertly deployed. Like, they're not gratuitous. There's just like the perfect amount of actual laugh lines in this essay. Whenever things start to get a little real, or we start to kind of like lose our connection with the narrator. Like, for instance, there's like a very real place where Lola's talking about how her behavior is motivated by a deep desire to like take revenge on everyone who had ever hurt her and not paid attention to her. She kind of recovers from that section with like something that makes you laugh out loud, and so you sort of get back into the mode of reading the story and not being sort of distracted by like worrying about her. So I think that's what I mean when I say control of tone. This essay is called The Last Photograph of Kat by Kori Sika. And if you haven't yet read it, you should go and do that now. It's really short. It'll take you probably like 5 to 7 minutes to read it, but you should probably also set aside maybe 10-15 minutes afterwards of like recovery time, because you will probably cry. I was gonna say, you know, like depending on whether you're a cat person, you'll probably cry, but I actually think anyone who has ever had any pet, even if you hate cats, could potentially be moved to tears by this essay. So what's happening in The Last Photograph of Kat is the essay is in the form of an extremely long photo caption. It actually ends with a photograph of Kat. It's an eulogy for Kat. It's a biography of Kat. It is a chronological description of Kat's life and his proclivities. But latently, there's a thread going on in the essay that is also about Kat's owner and the circumstances of Kat's owner's life and how they changed over the course of Kat's life. And that stuff is so elegantly obscured behind the story of Kat that you almost wouldn't even notice it unless you were looking for it. And that's why I chose this essay. I just think it's incredibly artful. It's also just a great example of how something really simple, a story told in chronological order, can, in just a few lines and a few telling details, contain so much information and so much power. There are a lot of different ways to tell a story when you're writing a first draft about an experience that has happened to you. You're probably going to want to go in chronological order. It's just an easier way to remember what happened. The close of this is, of course, about the moment of Kat's death. And I can see a version of this that's much less artful that actually opens with that detail, that has, in other words, more of a clue for the reader that what we're talking about here is a eulogy than just the title, The Last Photograph of Kat. And I think that would have taken away a lot of the essay's power. Instead, having the structure be that literally the first paragraph is about Kat being born. Yeah, he was born in the early mid-90s and grew up between Avenues C and D in a nice vacant lot that was becoming a garden. And then his biography begins there. Something that seems simple has room in it for a lot of complexity. This author is capable of writing in a lot of different modes and styles, and here we see him in a sort of elevated mode that's almost self-consciously self-serious. It's a little bit, it's almost funny in the way that it is applying a kind of very formal sentence structure, long sentences, and sort of a refusal to use contractions. There's something in that formality that is like kind of inherently a little bit funny when applied to this subject matter. Like I read this sentence and I'm sort of laughing and I don't know why. Because of his view that there was always something better beyond what boundaries so arbitrarily constrained him, Kat spent most of his life trying to climb over, through, and under any possible obstacle, and when that was not possible, he would, in search of new vantages, leap from place to place, from countertop to countertop, and fence top to fence top. That is a really long sentence. It has a lot of clauses. It's almost Jamesian, and it's so funny to read it in a blog post about a cat, and it just works incredibly well. I think what I like so much is that it's so easy to imagine a version of this essay that's like, my cat died yesterday. He was the best cat. I loved when he did this. I loved when he did that. I mean, this essay never uses the word I, but it's incredibly personal because in the context of learning about Kat's life, we learn where the author has lived, the circumstances of his life changing. It's almost even made clear that, different romantic relationships have been in play during the lifetime of the cat. It's got a lot of stuff going on just like slightly beneath the surface, and it's so much more powerful for what it holds back. One of the most difficult things with structure is ending a piece, and this piece has a fantastic ending, although when you're talking about death, fantastic endings are a little bit easier to come by. I hope that you have read the rest of the essay because it's like not fair for this to be the first encounter with the essay. Even in his last few days, he indulged in all these favorite activities and foods with great satisfaction and pride. In his last dark, early morning at home, in a sudden, extremely weakened condition, while everyone minding him was finally asleep, he left his favorite chair and staggered down to the living room, and then the sun came up and gave him a view into what was beyond the walls around him. This last paragraph is insane. It's so perfect. It's understated, but it doesn't spare any possible detail. Straining towards a dynamite ending is never good, but if you have at your fingertips the opportunity to go for a really just like balls out, like putting everything into it and just like making your reader cry ending, give it a shot. Like, why not? You know, why tone it down? If you've written something and you feel that it doesn't have any oomph, something about it, maybe it's just too straightforward, you might try as an experiment, experimenting with writing personally in the third person. Not to the extent that you actually pretend that you aren't you, but if you zoom out a bit, and take yourself out of it, even to the extent of focusing on the perspective of someone or something that's, you know, maybe in your mind right now, just an ancillary character in the story, that can really help. This is a biography of 20 years in someone's life through the lens of a cat. It's also a really great description of a cat. Both of those things can coexist, and you can use your skills and your perceptions and your judgment to determine what aspects of the story you want to be in the foreground and what aspects of the story you want to be in the background. And you can consciously manipulate that stuff, as all you have to do in order to consciously manipulate that stuff is to be aware of the stories within stories that we all tell. So this is a really different piece than the other ones that we're talking about, and you might even sort of be asking yourself, well, if it's not in the first person, like, how is this even a personal essay? Is this related to what I'm going to be doing when I write about a mistake I've made and how it shaped my life? And the answer is yes. This is also a mode of writing that is available to you, and it definitely falls under the heading of personal essay, I think. Your perspective in your personal writing doesn't always have to be obviously in the foreground. It can be helpful to experiment with different points of view. You might end up landing back on, you know, the most traditional and obvious, which is I. And certainly that's what I do, like the vast majority of the time. But when you've played with other stuff, it does help. You can have more information and maybe make slightly different judgment calls about what information you're going to include, what seems important from, you know, when you imagine what different people's perspective is going to be, what to leave out, what are the crucial, relevant details of the story. This essay is a blog post by me, Emily Gould, in case you forgot, called Our Graffiti. It's from about 3 years ago, and it is about a bunch of different stuff. It is about, you know, the power imbalance inherent in heterosexuality. I would say that's mostly what it's about. It is kind of about what the prompt for this class is about, because it's about a mistake that I made and the effect that it had on my life. It details a time when in college, maybe, you know, in some ways similar to Lola Pellegrino, although unfortunately not a freshman, so I don't have that excuse. I spray painted the word slut on the dorm room door of a guy who I just thought everyone should know that he was a slut, I guess. I guess my prompt for myself when I was writing this was just thinking about why am I attracted to the kind of writing that I'm attracted to. And in order to get to the answer to that question, I told a story about something that had happened in my life. When I was in college, a girl at my tiny college in the middle of nowhere, she was murdered, but everyone assumed that she had committed suicide, and her death was weirdly downplayed by the faculty and administration. Even in this 2,000-person community, it seemed like, the way that I put it in this essay, and again, this is like my perception of how this went down, but I was in this tiny town in the middle of nowhere, and a girl could die, and no one would care. And so just thinking about what that meant in that situation, what that meant in light of everything else that I'm talking about in this essay about like how women's perspectives are and aren't valued. I couldn't figure out at first when I was writing this why it was so important for me to tell that story, but finding a new context for it was something that in retrospect seems like it was really important for me to do. And I guess my point, and I do have one with that long anecdote, is that sometimes you don't really understand why you're writing what you're writing, and you just have to write it and sit with it, and then maybe think about how to frame it. Maybe the narrative comes first, and the kind of like making sense of it comes later, and you can overtly have a frame around it, as this essay does. And this essay is like an example of saying, this is the point of me telling you this story in a really like unmistakably clear way. You don't always have to do that, but if you want to, you can. It's hard to talk about because it's structurally kind of all over the place. It incorporates 3 different threads of narrative. There's the part that takes place when I'm in college. There's sort of me right now reading a blog post that has made a big impact on me and trying to figure out why that is. And so I provide a little synopsis of that other blog post. And then there's some stuff about Emily Books and about I Love Dick and first person writing by women and feminist theory. So those things all coming together, coalescing into another moment in the narrative where I'm back in the present narrating an argument that I had in the car with my then boyfriend, now husband. In terms of structure, I think this piece has some flaws. It's clear to me rereading it that I wrote it pretty quickly, and the different sections there aren't really clear transitions between them. I jump around and I just end a section by putting like some asterisks and making a little bit of space between them. Maybe not great to do that all the time, but good to remember that you can do it. If you want to drop one thread, leave it there and start writing about something else. It kind of helps when later maybe you're rearranging the building blocks of your essay, and then you can decide what order things make more sense in. I also, I found that I was surprised rereading this to learn that I do have a point, like a really kind of clear, I guess in a more traditional writing class, you would probably call it like a nut graph or something. It takes me forever to get there, but it kind of works, I think, because I, at that point, have woven together the 2 strands well enough that I can get away with waiting for, I would conservatively say like 2,000 words to make my point. do as I say, not as I do. But it will actually resonate a little bit more because you're bringing more of your own thoughts about everything that I've covered to that place. So in terms of voice, this is me writing in almost my most informal mode. To me, a more informal mode means that I address the reader directly as though we're having a conversation. I leave in parentheticals that any editor would probably cut. You know, I let myself get away with stuff that an editor wouldn't, but I do it in the service of kind of an intimacy with the reader. Like, there's a sense that even on the level of writing style, I'm letting it all hang out. Like, I'm revealing sort of a vulnerability to you that invites you in. And whether that's conscious or not, I think in a way it can be what the best bloggy writing does. I mean, it doesn't have to, but some people just have more natural, like, control over their tone. But it can help when you feel stuck or when you're really not sure how to tell a story, to just write about it as if you're writing to a trusted friend who already totally gets you. And then you can backtrack from there. Or you can discover that that was the best possible way to tell the story and just leave it be. I know that there are things that I write all the time where I'm like, as I'm writing, I'm like, I just have to get through this. I just have to get this out. I'll change it after I'm done. And then those are the things that end up, after I'm done, I'm like, okay, well, I just have to hit publish or else I'll never have the guts to say this again. So you can do that. I would recommend always sleeping on stuff. There are references throughout this piece to other writers, other blog posts, even other books. And I think I tried to make those inviting, but also to provide enough context so that someone wouldn't feel like they wouldn't be able to understand this piece unless they had already read I Love Dick by Chris Kraus. I think it's important never to have a place where you have some hyperlinked text that someone has to click on the link and read something in order to understand your piece. That just doesn't work. Someone will go away and never come back, and that's the exact opposite of what you want. So first, let's talk about if you've never written anything like this before. A great way to write when you're first sitting down with a prompt is first, obviously, pick your mistake and then write around it a little bit. I think it's always really helpful to give yourself permission to write terribly in a first draft. Write whatever pops into your head. You'll get to where you need to be eventually. I find free writing super helpful. A lot of times good stuff comes out of it when you just give yourself permission to say whatever. And then when you go back for your second pass, you can start to hone in on details that seem like they might be the relevant details that you want to focus on. You can see what's working and what doesn't. Something that is helpful is to follow the model of the second essay we talked about, The Last Photograph of Kat, and just lay your story out in chronological order. Then, if necessary, go back and rearrange. If you've written a lot of personal essays and you're taking this class as a way to kind of like shake up the Etch-a-Sketch of your brain, that's awesome. I'm pretty much right there with you. I think it can be interesting to take apart other people's writing and see what you like about it, maybe what you don't. I mean, maybe you totally disagree with me that these are awesome examples. Trying something that's a little bit more structurally innovative, or just something that's different than what you've been doing. Like, for example, if you're constantly defaulting to I, me, first person, step out of it and still write about yourself. I found that extremely helpful, just because it helps with the thing that you're supposed to be doing anyway, but that it's easy to forget how to do, which is thinking of yourself as a character and doing the work of creating a character. Like, in other words, making the character make sense, even though obviously the character makes sense. You know so much about the character. It's you. The essay, The Last Photograph of Kat, is a great example of that. You can put yourself a little bit out of the frame and focus on other details, telling a story that is about something that happened to you through a different lens. Since we're talking about personal essays in this class, I've been thinking a lot about thinking back to the time when I was working on my book of essays, And the Heart Says Whatever, and what I tried to do was do linked stories that all focused on a moment in my life that wasn't obviously consequential, but created some aspect of my personality, like made me who I am, in other words. And some of those essays I think really hold up. I mean, the book to me seems, I'm 33 and I mostly wrote it when I was 26, 27. So some of it seems to me like deep thoughts that a 26-year-old would have, but some of it seems like deep thoughts that only a 26-year-old would have access to and would be willing to share. So that in and of itself I think is really valuable. Like a kind of bravery that you only have at a time in your life before you have really experienced a lot of like crazy blowback, I guess. But also, yeah, like the stuff that you think and say before you know any better can be like really pure and great and valuable. I wanted to talk a little bit about imitation, which I think can be a really useful tool, especially when you're starting out and you want to try to write something that has a different style or a different kind of sensibility than what you're used to. You don't have to imitate things literally. Like, you don't have to write a long sentence with many clauses the way that Corey does, and you don't have to interject like GChat speak into your prose the way that Lola Pellegrino does. You also don't have to focus on the same kind of details that they do. What you have to do is figure out what the role of those rhetorical tactics are in their pieces, and then figure out what is analogous that's going to fulfill that same role in your story. Hard. I believe in you. When I first started doing this kind of writing, especially online, my feeling about my own work was first thought, best thought. I thought that by overworking things, I could actually make them worse. And you know what? I wasn't completely wrong. I mean, sometimes you can overwork things, and also sometimes you can just lose your nerve. In general, though, it really helps to go over everything that you've written and just edit it. You're an editor. All writers are. It's a related skill set. You don't have to rely on someone else to edit your work, although if you can get someone else to edit your work, that's always really helpful too. An extra set of eyes. It doesn't really even matter whose they are. You can get great feedback from pretty much anyone literate. You just have to know what to take and what to leave behind. So, quick and dirty editing tips. I think what some of the best writing advice I've ever gotten, which I obviously don't always follow, is get rid of all of your adverbs, meaning anything that ends in ly. Like, this is advice you've probably heard 1,000 times, but we all think that we're the one person who's allowed to use them. And especially if you're writing dialogue, she said exasperatedly, just don't do it. Said's fine. Really. Kind of, sort of, very, really, I think, I feel, in fact, you could say that, actually, basically. I mean, these things are a disease. That I have. I just want to be clear about that. But the reason why I'm aware that I have this disease is because every time I go to hit publish on anything, or before I hand something into an editor, I do a quick skim. You can even use tools that are inside of your computer to find these words. I did a search for actually in my first book, and I can't even, I think there were like 74. It was not a long book. Get rid of your actuallys. No one likes to hear actually. No one likes to hear obviously. Obviously inevitably sounds condescending. It's like saying thanks again. You're like, yeah, okay. You can just say thanks. You know? I personally have a big problem with putting things in parentheses that either don't need to be in parentheses or don't need to be there at all. If you have something inside of parentheses that is not that is inside parentheses because it's not relevant to the paragraph that it's living in, you can cut it, and it's always better. I guarantee you, even if it's a joke, even if it's like the most hilarious joke. If it's the most hilarious joke and you're like married to it and you need to have it, you can take it out of the parentheses and you can put it just as its own separate paragraph outside of the paragraph that it used to be a part of, and that will work too, but use that sparingly. The other thing that I do all the time is a little aside contained within M dashes or N dashes. I never am actually sure which. I don't want to say don't do that because sometimes it's really good and funny, but if you do it all the time, it's just kind of exhausting to read. It has a bad rhythm. If you're reading your piece aloud, which you should obviously do, and you're encountering a lot of those, pick your favorite one and then take all of the rest away. Sorry, it had to be done. This is one weird trick, but try it and leave a little comment or something in Skillshare that's like, Emily, thank you. You've helped me so much, because it really works. And the trick is cut the first paragraph of everything you write, and sometimes the last one too. Even when you have gone through many drafts of something, there's still sometimes vestigial backing into it that is left from when you were first writing and you were trying to figure out how to write about it and you weren't quite there with it yet. Usually all of the information that's contained in that first paragraph is found in a better form elsewhere in your piece, and that's a good place for it. Usually it's in the second paragraph. The second paragraph should just be the first paragraph. The other thing is to cut either the last sentence or the last paragraph of most things. A little bit more controversial. I mean, sometimes you really want to stick the landing, but it can also be easy to belabor a point or to just end on a false note. See how it feels and how it reads without the existing ending. You might end up revising the ending or even rearranging things so that the final paragraph has just a little bit more of a sense of closure. But often it's okay to just, stop. The point of editing is not to make your writing into something that is like a pasteurized, safe to consume, uniform product. For me, the point of it is to determine whether something that you're doing is your style or whether it's an unconscious bad habit. And sometimes the line between them can be pretty fine. I mean, you could make a case for using actually to start sentences all the time as being part of your style. I'll think you're full of it, but you can make that case. Close reading what you've written analytically, though, will probably really quickly make it obvious to you what choices you're making and what are just kind of bad patterns that are holding you back. So we read 3 personal essays. For all of the essays, we talked about having a hook, inviting your reader in. We talked about structure and how you don't necessarily have to go in chronological order. We talked about the people who wrote these essays and their voices and what make them so singular, and how you can play with the tools that they use and experiment with different voices. Experiment until you find something that sounds authentically like you, because that's the whole point. So if this is the kind of writing that you're interested in, and I'm guessing that it is because you're here still. I did just want to talk a little bit about possible professional applications of everything that we've talked about. One of the things that was really helpful to me in my career was kind of giving myself permission to write before anyone said, you're allowed to write, and this is what you're allowed to write about. And how I started out was just writing what were sort of proto-personal essays on my own blog. You don't have to wait for someone to edit you or someone else to assign you a piece. You can assign yourself something. You can pick something that is really important and relevant to you and tease out your feelings about it and examine them, sort of in the same way that that some of these essays that we've talked about have. And you can grow and learn and do that stuff by writing online. And I think there are risks inherent in that kind of evolution. Certainly stuff that I've experienced in the world has not always been like glowingly positive, but what is always positive is that the people who you want to see and connect with your work will find it, and you'll learn from them, they'll learn from you, and your evolution as a writer will continue with the input of a lot of different people's voices, and that can't be a bad thing, I think. The tips in terms of how to edit yourself and how to think critically but not, self-hatingly about your own work are designed to help you put something into a potential future editor's hands that's already, even if they're a crappy editor, because those exist, that will already be pretty polished and hopefully at least like 90% of the way ready for eventual publication. And I mean, the tips are also designed to help you push back when things happen to your writing via an editing process that make it not true to what you originally wanted to express. So I hope it helps. I think it helped me. So that's something. But yeah, I think it's a tricky time to figure out how to be really true to your own voice and your goals with your writing, but also to put it out there in a way that people will actually read and have access to. And thinking about your work in the way that you've done today is a really important step in that process. So, kudos. I'm glad you did it. All right, so a mistake that altered your life, that you still think about. It's a really juicy prompt. You won't have any trouble getting started, and I can't wait to see what you write. I'm really excited. So, what are you waiting for? Turn this off. Start writing. Bye. See you later.